All right, well, I think I'll go ahead and get us started. Thank you all for coming to today's branching out session. Today we're going to be talking about the Colorado Forest Resilience Planning Guide. If you're not super aware of the Forest Resilience Planning Guide, that's great. We're going to tell you all about it. This has been an effort of the Colorado Forest Health Council and specifically the Leveraging Resources Committee of the council. And we've been working on this for quite a while. I think since like mid 2023 is when that recommendation originally passed. So this guide has been a long time coming, and I know that we're all really excited about it, those of us who have been involved in it since the beginning. So we're excited to share the guide with you and get some ideas on how we can put it to use. Hopefully it'll be useful for everyone on this call and also a lot of other people. So today's session, we're going to start with an overview of the guide and what it is and how it came to be and how you can use it. We'll do a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll have an activity where you can actually like look through the guide in real time and test it out, and that way you can get a sense for it. And then we'll do some discussion. So that's kind of the outline for the day and what we're going to be talking about. And before we get into our presentation, I am very excited to introduce Allison Lurch from Colorado Department of Natural Resources and Christina Burry from the Colorado State Forest Service. And they're just going to give us a little welcome and share some agency perspectives on the guide. So we didn't discuss who was going to go first, Allison or Christina. Maybe Allison?
Yeah,
You want to?
absolutely. Thank you. And thanks so much for hosting another great branching out session, Katie. I just wanted to just give a brief thank you to Laura and her team, and then everyone on the Leveraging Resources Committee for the Forest Health Council. For our 2023, just a little brief history. In the 2023 Forest Health Council annual report, there were some administrative recommendations outlined. And this one just stuck. And I know you said it's been a long time coming, but it takes this much work and this much collaboration to put forth a document and a planning effort that is so robust and applicable. So I just want to thank you all for all the work that you did on this. I know my name is on the planning guide, but I would say I came in very much at the end. So it was all of you, and I'm really grateful for all the work. But I wanted to just talk about the definition of leveraging really quick before I talk about some applicable nature of this, because I was thinking about this definition of using something that you already have in order to achieve something new or better, just one of the definitions. And I think in times now, like now, more than ever, we're going to need to leverage our resources, whether it's capacity, funding, knowledge, everything. And Colorado has such a robust collaboratives network. Not to just be so cheesy, but we really do. And so we've been at the table with each other, and we have collaboratives throughout the state that are in different stages of readiness. Looking at you, Chaska, and we can sit in our spaces and we can understand where we are at and who is at the table, and then we always have ways to learn more, do things that are different, explore new ways to collaborate. And that's what I think this guide is really going to do for us as a state. So I'm really excited to have you all here to listen more in depth about what it is. Even for me, a 100-page document can be a little intimidating at times, but don't be intimidated by it because it's really sectioned out in a way that is so easily digestible. So yeah, the resources in this they're not just for implementing collaborative cross-boundary practices, they're for strengthening relationships, creating and fostering more robust partnerships. So as far as what we're doing with it, at least at DNRs, we're really excited to work with our co-swap grantees and our future grantees to really, really encourage them to use this guide. And when maybe there's a bump in the road or a place where they maybe need some guidance on how to move forward. Could be with a project, could be with a planning effort. More than likely, some guidance is within here. So we're really excited to help work on that. And last, I just want to talk about the Department of Natural Resources and the Colorado Strategic Wildfire Action Program. We're really invested in CFRI's collaborative stages of readiness. And as you look through this document, it's embedded in here. And so we're taking CFRI research and we're applying it to the ground, which is so absolutely incredible. So I just want to thank you all. Thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing me a few minutes today.
Awesome. And thank you for being here, Allison. It's really great to have you. And Christina, we'd like to hear from you too.
Yeah, thank you. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Christina Burry. I'm the Deputy State Forester. I've been with the State Forest Service for almost a year now. So I see a lot of State Forest Service folks on the call. I'm really excited that you're here. Thanks for representing us. But yeah, I started working as part of the Leveraging Resources Subcommittee and working on the guide, the concept of it, when I was at Denver Water. I was serving on the Leveraging Resources Subcommittee. And at the time, we had talked about, well, there was this awesome post-fire playbook, and we wanted something like that, similar to the post-fire playbook, but more pre-fire. And we also talked about how there was a need for trying to understand like who the key players were and key contacts in the forestry space. And so it went from a concept of kind of an inclusive like contact list, but wanted to take a more comprehensive approach with looking at information about funding sources and collaboration. And so CFRI was working on the stages of collaborative readiness, and that seemed to dovetail really nicely with what the Leveraging Resources Subcommittee wanted to achieve. What I think is special about this plan is that it recognizes the uniqueness of Colorado's forested landscapes, as well as uniqueness of the collaborative landscapes like Ali was mentioning. So we have to work together in Colorado for better or for worse. That's because it's complex. We have a mix of land ownerships, a mix of terrain, a mix of industry, and lands that supply our water. And so, for all of those reasons and complexities, we have to collaborate and we have to come to the table together to innovate and come together for solutions oriented conversation. And so, how I envision the State Forest Service using this guide is really just help in providing resources to come to the table to provide those solutions oriented approaches for communities that may be in different stages of collaborative readiness. And that's okay. I think sometimes collaboratives get off the ground because they get some funding. Sometimes everybody comes together because they realize the urgency in a certain landscape. And so I think recognizing the uniqueness of the forested landscape and the collaborative landscape, and using this guide as a resource to help everybody come together for solutions oriented approaches to tackle the forest health concerns that we have into the future. I also just want to take the opportunity to, thank CDR and Laura for their amazing work on this. And also just recognizing Katie and the Colorado Forest Collaborative Network for fostering collaboration and how important it is specifically for the health of Colorado's forests. It is important to collaborate. That will never go away because of the uniqueness here. So thank you, Katie, and thank you all for, the opportunity to highlight the guide.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. And yeah, kind of just building off of Christina's thank yous, I wanted to highlight a couple other people who are on the call today. Some of them you will hear from, some of them you will not. But our development team, kind of the core group that put together this guide was Christina, who you just met, Laura Hickey, who Christina talked about. Laura's with CDR Associates. Chaska Woiwaka is on the call, and she will be one of our breakout room facilitators later. Allison Lurch, who you just met, me, who you met, And then Lily Peralt, Diana Selby, who I don't think are on this call, but they were also on our core team. And then Brett Wolk, who you will hear from very momentarily, and Courtney Young, who was not able to make it today, and she was really sad to not make it. So that was kind of our core team. So thanks to all those people. And then also thanks to Hannah O'Reilly and Tyler Beaton for being note takers with us today. We are very appreciative of all the people who helped the guide come together and this presentation come together. So with that, I think we will go ahead and pass it over to Brett, and Brett is going to start us off with some overview of what is this guide that everybody's so excited about. So hold tight while I share my screen.
Yay. I don't know if I can match the excitement around everyone. It's a lot of excitement here. But I'll give it my best. So yeah, I am Brett Wolk. I'm a co-director with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. We're at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. The goal, we're going to give a 15-ish minutes, maybe a little more presentation, some overview of like kind of a little more how it developed, what's in it, and how we envision it being used. So I'll try and hit some points that haven't been said yet, because we did a pretty good overview before, really thanks to Christina and Allison and statewide leaders like that for stepping in. So the guide offers a framework for a lot of different folks that are active in the space, right? Agencies, resource allocators, private landowners, local collaboratives, and it is to align forest management strategies, leverage resources in order to sustain forest health and all the values we love from our forests. As was mentioned, we finished it in 2025, and thanks to the State Forest Service, who is hosting it on a website. It's easily Googleable if you want to find the website. Go ahead, next slide. And that approach was really to provide a framework for aligning all of these things, right? So it's not a thou shalt do it this way, but here's a framework and resources to help people shape forest management and planning. And so some of the basic tenets were to assist Colorado communities working towards that collaboratively developing and implementing forest resilience strategies, working on landscapes throughout roughly the size of a county or multiple adjacent counties. So that doesn't mean that it only applies to county boundaries, but just sort of a rough geography where the planning is big enough to make an impact on the forest processes we're trying to manage, yet small enough to also coordinate and make an impact. And then the goal is to help people better mitigate, respond, and recover from commons forest services. So sort of before, during, and after, as forests are dynamic systems. And so thinking about forests as dynamic systems in that way and engaging as they are changing on our landscape. Go ahead. As was mentioned, this is what the Forest Health Council is. It was reimagined and reestablished in 2021 by the Colorado State Legislature. It currently consists of 26 members, some designated by the governor, such as Christina Burry, who serves on behalf of the Colorado State Forest Service, and others who are volunteer appointees, which would include sort of myself and Katie, that fill other seats representing all different corners and perspectives of Colorado. And then the council objective is to provide that collaborative forum to advise the governor and General Assembly on a broad range of issues, opportunities, and threats. So that is sort of our mission, is to serve as a body to advise the state leadership about forest resilience. And that is where, you know, some of the things that we hear from this branching out, and the guide itself is also intended as that audience. Go ahead, Katie. The timeline, we talked about this in 2023 is when the idea was hatched. It made it into a report in 2024 and a recommendation by the Colorado Forest Health Council. And then the Leveraging Resources Committee within the council led the development. And we finished it and brought it back to the council in 2025 for an official adoption and acceptance and approval by the council. we went over this guide development. I think I'll just say, there was a steering committee, and then there was contracting out with CDR and ERO. So Laura and Lily were brought in as contractors, but really quickly became partners in this as well. And it was really a team effort and went above and beyond to work with the other folks on that list. The ideas, flattering of saying like this is the CFRI things, and Allison talking about implementing some of the stages of readiness. I would need to highlight there's lots of other ideas in there, and it's not just that. This was a collaborative effort of bringing together a lot of the best information that we could for all of Colorado. And we're in trouble if CFRI is the only authority on that. There's lots of other things out there and ideas that we need to be aware of. So if you go to the next slide, Katie, can kind of talk about that of, the goal was to really understand what is out there and what's impacting forest management. And then we use some methods of, yes, looking at things like the collaborative stage of readiness. And the part of that was because the Forest Health Council had talked about that for a couple of years of like, this is really useful and we want to do this more. We want to do some of this work in all the places, but how do we do that with the resources we have? And so we tried to broaden it and got engagement from, key interviews, sent surveys out, did focus groups, and offered opportunities for lots of people to engage. Over 90 different individuals, lots of different organizations, in addition to the members of the Forest Health Council contributed to this. So lots of ideas and input that we integrated into the guide. The audience, practitioners. I wish we could do a raise of hands, like who on this call this considers himself a practitioner versus a resource allocator. But for the people doing the work on the ground, right? The local agencies, landowners, place-based collaboratives, communities, to provide some guidance on how do you really go about improving coordination and forest management strategies, and also really provide a common language for people to use doing this. I think as important or more important, again, considering the Colorado Forest Health Council mission, right? Reporting to the state legislature and the governor's office is those resource allocators, right? The policymakers, program managers, funding entities, to help them better align technical and financial resources with the planning and implementation needs across Colorado. Allison Lurch said this very well. It's not just about money. There are lots of resources other than money to leverage out there. Money is important, but there's lots of other things. And so this guide really highlights ways where those resource allocators can be more efficient and effective in funding the activities that are most impactful. So how can practitioners and resource allocators work together to better make our forest resilient? That's the goal of this guide, is to bring them together and everyone more in alignment. Go ahead. So this is where I'll pass it off to Katie to talk a little bit more about what is in it and how we sort of leverage this collaborative stages of readiness framework to build on that. And I think just really encourage you to think about, as Katie's going through this, as was said in the beginning, a lot of collaboratives develop because you get money or there's an issue of a big fire or something that like a desperate need to work together. But a lot of times what we've seen and the science shows is you need to start, right? If you start at stage 4, it's really critical to go back and build that strong core in order to sustain productive and effective management at the end. So think about this as a continuum and not exact stages or steps to take. And so Katie, tell us what is in this guide.
Yes, thank you, Brett, for that context. And yeah, so if you've pulled up the guide at all, it's pretty long, but we don't want you to get overwhelmed by it because it really is, you just take it bite by bite. And so like Brett said, this is written as kind of a linear structure because that's the way it makes sense to write it, but we totally understand that you'll be bouncing around and you may be in stage 3 now and then go to stage 1 and you'll be all over the place, and that's okay. So try to listen to this and know that it's non-linear and it's not necessarily prescriptive. It's just meant to be a resource to you. So what you're seeing here is the collaborative stages of readiness framework that we talked a little bit about. So this was developed by CFRI, and this is what the guide is based around. But again, like this is kind of the structure of the guide, and then we used a ton of different resources and feedback from those focus groups to add to this and expand it into the Forest Resilience Planning Guide. So the stages of readiness framework breaks out these 4 stages, and what the guide does is it takes those 4 stages and it adds actions to each of those stages of readiness. And so, for example, here, like we've got stage 1, establish a community of partners around a shared vision. And we've got 4 actions associated with that. And so as you go through the guide, you can kind of look through the actions and figure out like what you feel like you've already done, where you're at, and then each one has some resources and information associated with it. So that's kind of how to navigate the guide. And I'm going to go through each of these super briefly just to give you an idea of what you might find if you're looking through the guide. So stage 1, like I said, is to establish a community of partners around a shared vision. So if you're in stage 1, you're going to open up the guide and you'll see 4 different actions associated with that. Action 1, define forest benefits and values. So this is really figuring out in your specific community collaborative context, what does resilience mean to you and to that context? Then action 2, align planning boundaries with opportunities. As hopefully we know, forests don't follow the boundaries that most of us follow, but sometimes we have to set boundaries for planning purposes. And so what boundaries make sense in, again, your specific context? Action 3 is gathering collaborators. So who are the right people in your context? Who should be at the table and how do we get them together to work together? And action 4, develop a vision of forest resilience. So once you have the right people and once you kind of know your values, how can we develop a vision together? And so as I'm talking through all of those, hopefully you heard me saying like in your context. And so this is really meant to be something that all these resources build together and you come up with like a really personalized plan for your collaborative and your community. And so if you were to work through all these actions, these are the resulting products that you would end up with. So things like landscape boundaries, a list of stakeholders, responsibilities for each partner, vision statements, etc. Those are the things that if you work through this stage of readiness, you would walk away from the guide with. Moving into stage 2. Stage 2 is a big one. It's got 5 actions. So action 5 is to conduct a forest resilience spatial assessment. It's one that I hear a lot about from people in the Colorado Forest Collaboratives Network. So this is like identifying the risks and values, again, specific to your context. And just as an example of what you might find in the guide, in Action 5, I know that there's a case study on Chaffee County's spatial assessment and the RADS process. And so, you know, throughout the guide, you'll also find examples of what other people have done at this stage of readiness and, you know, how that might apply to your area. Action 6, brainstorm mitigation response and recovery strategies. So this is looking through all of the documents that already exist and also adding them to all of the ideas and things that your group have created to come up with some really robust strategies. Action 7, building public awareness. So this is when the community really gets involved and how can we keep them informed? How can we keep them involved? What level of involvement do we want from them, etc. Action 8, establish measurable objectives. So I think in the guide, there's a reference to SMART goals here. So we're looking for things that can be monitored and can be monitored in an effective way and that we can, you know, create a path to getting there. And then action 9, prioritize mitigation, response, and recovery objectives. So using all of the things listed above, all of the values that we've identified, the assessments we've done, the data we've collected, now we can prioritize specific actions in our context. So that's stage 2, and stages 1 and 2 are really the planning side, and then in stages 3 and 4, that is when we get into the implementation side. And so, like I think Brett mentioned, a lot of collaboratives start out at stage 3 because you get a huge slug of funding and you have to come together to figure out how to use it and how to put it into action. And so maybe you're starting at stage 3, but then you go back to stage 1 and 2 to kind of lay that groundwork later. So stage 3 is translating the strategy that you've just created into action. So you'll have 3 actions within this. Action 10 is activate strategies and communicate progress. So within your partnership that you've created, how are you going to keep people informed about the project, the progress of projects as they are implemented? Action 11, secure resources for implementation. So this is identifying needs across the group and coming up with joint funding applications and agreements, and making sure that all of those things are coordinated amongst all the partners. And action 12 is monitor implementation. So this is where we get into adaptive management and monitoring in ways that lends themselves to storytelling to funders, agencies, the public. How can we collect the data that will tell that story? And then lastly, we get into stage 4, which is adapt and sustain momentum. 3 actions in this stage. Action 13 is practicing adaptive management. And so one of the resulting products that might come out of this is adaptive management workshops, where we really get into with the group what's working, what needs to adapt, how are we making progress in relation to the objectives that we set. Action 14, communicate results and challenges to leadership. And so how can we as practitioners communicate back up with like policymakers, for example, and there's some templates in there about how to do this. And action 15 is a check-in on collaborative capacity. And so in this action, we walk through like how to conduct a situation assessment of your collaborative, and again, kind of figure out like what's going well, where do we want to change things, all that good stuff. So that is a very brief overview of the guide. And again, we're going to, here in a few minutes, do an activity where you can explore an action or two to see what it looks like in the guide. And also Laura's going to give us an overview of that. And then we just put this slide in here to show you one example. So when I was just talking through all of those stages and actions, I was really giving it as an example of how a practitioner would use this guide and how someone in a community, in a county, would pick up the guide and walk through it to create a collaborative. But as Brett was talking about at the beginning, that's just one target audience. And the other target audience is what we call resource allocators. And so this could be policymakers, the Colorado Forest Health Council, agencies, funders. This is our other big target audience. And so as the chair of the Leveraging Resources Committee, I just wanted to share a couple of ways that we are using the Colorado Forest Resilience Planning Guide to guide our work. And so in the committee, we are using the guide to identify stages, activities, or geographies where resources and opportunities exist to better leverage resources. And then identifying the most effective actions to support forest resilience. And so, for example, one of the things we were looking at recently is which of these actions have a lot of resources associated with them already? Which ones do people tend to hit more pinch points in, and how can we leverage resources to better support the actions that are maybe less supported right now, or less funded right now. And so that's kind of an example of how these resource allocators can look at the guide and see like, oh, there's a gap here. How can we support that? So we're really hoping that that'll be another benefit of this guide. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Laura, and she is going to give us a demonstration of how to use the guide.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly kind of give you an overview of what to expect in the guide, but really I'm eager to get you all to open that link that Christy had shared in the chat. Thanks for sending that, Christy. And kind of find the action that Katie described that maybe resonated with you most, or you were the most interested to learn more about. So each of the 15 actions, Katie, if you want to go to the next slide, starts, it includes key questions, supporting resources. It gives you an overview of necessary capacity and expertise you might expect to use within the action and in completing the action, a level of effort estimation, and it opens up with an overview before jumping into activities, templates, and or case studies. So really, each action says, here's what to expect. Here's some background information, some conceptual information, and here are some tools and things to use to do this step, do this action. So, Katie, you can go to the next slide. A lot of those pieces are outlined on an action overview page. So for each action, you'll see the first page is this green page that has the name of the action. It has those key questions. Along the side, there's kind of just a dot indicating where the action falls among all of the actions. And then it's a reminder there of which stage the action falls in. I think these action overview pages are really useful for the resource allocators to understand kind of what Katie was just getting at. You can see here between action 2 and action 9, the supporting resources, there aren't any listed for action 9 because it's really hard to list some of those things versus the boundary planning resources. There's an abundance of those. And so I'll go a little bit deeper into each of these actions. I chose these ones because one's in like the earlier stages, it's really planning oriented, and action 9 is getting you into that kind of implementation phase. It was something we heard in focus groups that actually both of these steps, both of these processes are really difficult for collaboratives to figure out. So I'm excited to share these ones in particular too. Katie, if you want to jump. So action 2, like I said, it starts out, you have that intro page, and then it lays out an overview of, here's a way to think about the geographic scope. That's probably where your data is aligning, is with the geographic scope of watersheds, of forest landscapes, of counties, of municipalities, of all these different things. And then how to kind of move from geographic scope into establishing the scale of planning. There's a call out to the Fire Adapted Colorado network map. It's a really good example of how boundaries for planning and organizing and collaborating might look different than the boundaries that we draw for county lines and things like that. Katie, you can go to the next page. And then to really make sure you can get going, not just give you the information, but give you some tools to utilize that information and apply that information. This action has both an activity and a template. So the activity pages you'll find are an overview of kind of what to think about, how to think about it, some steps to take, some conversations to have. And then the templates are really practical draft agendas for potentially doing this activity. So they're really meant for you to, again, this activity is how you apply the information you just read about. The template is a place to help you really get started in moving that activity forward. And we can talk about action 9. So this one is prioritizing mitigation, response, and recovery objectives. This is super hard to do across so many different partners. This is something I facilitate all the time. And so I'm really hopeful that this action, along with the other actions that really feed into it, will give folks a way to navigate that prioritization when it can be really tough to make these kinds of decisions. But hopefully you're doing the groundwork to make these decisions easier to make as a group. So the overview really includes considerations like urgency, feasibility, impact, ways, frameworks, and methodologies that you can use to narrow your amazing list of strategies and objectives and decide what's going to be a 1 to 2 year goal and what's going to be a 3 to 5 year goal, those kinds of things, while also acknowledging pilot projects are often what brings you all together. So there might be an influx of a resource that kind of brings that collaboration together, and sometimes there's even a benefit of saying, oh, this was a 3 to 5 year goal, but it really aligns with an opportunity right now. So let's do it. Let's work together. Let's be opportunistic. Let's be nimble, and let's lean on each other to get objectives and done, and feel empowered to sometimes not have the perfect prioritization system, and be flexible in that way. This action also includes a case study, if you want to go to the next slide. So the case studies all kind of have this light blue background. We really wanted to make sure we gave real life examples of how this has already been done without the guide. These are things that are done and successes that we see. And so how can we kind of amplify those successes and help folks have lessons learned from them? So we highlighted the Upper South Platte partnership here, and how they are able to really be successful in prioritizing projects through the processes that they've set up in their collaborative. And again, a template for a workshop agenda. So giving you that tool of how to make prioritization as a group happen, and an example of how it's been done in a certain context. So with that, that's kind of where you jump in. You'll want to find the table of contents and like click the action that you want to look at. The templates, those activities, those case studies, they're all really good examples for practitioners to look at. And like I mentioned, I think those overview pages and kind of those first introductory pages will be really helpful for the resource allocators to understand at a big picture how this is all working together. Do I have one more slide, Katie?
Just a thank you.
Just a thank you. Yeah, I'm glad Brett went over the outreach we did for this. So it really was a collaborative effort to put this together. We had so many folks who gave really, really insightful, helpful input that made sure that this was applicable. And we had a lot of goals to meet with one document. And there's a lot of pages to meet those goals, but couldn't have done it without the development team and also all the folks we engaged along the way.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Stop my screen share for a moment. Yeah, so hopefully that gives a good overview of what the heck this guide is and how you might go about actually using it. I think now we're going to pause for some Q&A, with the note that you will get a chance to look through the guide in our activity afterwards. Oh, and as Brett noted in the chat, we are making a 4-page overview, sort of like an executive summary of the guide, and that'll be coming soon. We'll send it in our follow-ups, and that'll kind of go through like this presentation did, like here's how to use the guide, here's what you can expect from it. So keep an eye out for that, and please feel free to share it. So now I'll open up to questions. If you want to put them in the chat or raise your hand, please feel free to do so. There's no questions because we explained it so clearly that everyone is a guide expert.
I think like if there's any questions about this was how it came to be, what's the intended use of this? There's a lot of information in there. And I think that's what we're hoping to cover in the breakout groups is more detailed questions of like, what if I'm in this spot in my group and I want to do this, that, or the other? How do I do that? Those are hard to ask in front of a big group, but if there's a like, who would you like to take this guide to? Who do you think it's useful for? What do you think the council should use it for? I think this is a great time for that. And if not, then we can maybe just dive into the breakout groups. But just any questions on the material you've seen so far presented? And I see Esther has a hand up, so break the ice for us, Esther. What's the question?
Hi. So I was just wondering if there are aspects of this that make it Colorado specific. It seems like a pretty transferable resource to other geographies. And yeah, I'm going to the Idaho Forest Resilience Partnership meeting next week, for example. You know, it seems like sharing it with some of these other groups that are doing similar work might make sense.
Yeah, I would say you're totally spot on. The framework, I think, applies in other places. We really centered the resources on things that could be useful statewide to Coloradans. And there's like upfront, there's some information about forest management authorities specific to Colorado. So kind of the different players at the federal, state, and local levels. But so they might not find those specific resources the most useful for them, but I would say the framework definitely applies.
Yeah, great observation, Esther. And I think, you know, in our experience with the collaborative stages of readiness, there are people across the West in the country that have looked at that and are thinking about how they can adopt that for regional or national level programs as some of those resource allocators. So absolutely. And I think some of the resources, we were pretty light on listing specific resources in the guide. We wanted to give some to have some tangible examples. But the second that you put a website up there or a new shiny prioritization tool, tomorrow there's a new one and that old one is out of date. And so careful about not listing too much, but enough to give you an idea of what's happening. And I think that was intentional so that not just for Colorado, but other places could also find resources that are up to date and the most advanced to use at the time so that the guide is not out of date the first day that it's published.
Yeah. I'll also just mention that a lot of this centers around values and benefits, and some of the suggested kind of things to think about were really rooted in what we heard from the focus groups and the engagement of people throughout Colorado. So there might be additional considerations for places outside of Colorado and within Colorado, but I just wanted to make that caveat too.
Just one more emphasize and then another question. It was Colorado specific because it was through the Colorado Forest Health Council, and that fundamentally is where it was developed. So that Esther, that's sort of why it says that, but yeah, use it everywhere.
I am very excited to hear what you all talked about. So we're going to do a little share out, and then we can also have a little bit broader group discussion, bounce ideas off of what you guys talked about in your individual groups and get some bigger group insights. So let's see, who was in room 1?
I was in room 1. I can I can give a quick overview, and then also if anybody else from my group wants to add, please do. But I think with the second question, so like what resources do we have? We really concentrated on like each other as a resource and the people that we have within our networks as something that we should really double down on, and especially in spaces where there's turnover and knowledge might be lost, kind of utilizing networks like the one we're all sitting here in right now as a space to like hone our resources and to gain more knowledge. And then in terms of what do we need, the main theme was money. We all need more money, and we need money for personnel so that we can have more time. And with that in mind as well, I think there was a little bit of a conversation around making sure that money is being put into the right places and spent on the right things, with one example being, spending money on pre-fire and mitigation and on forest health rather than just this reactionary post-fire and fire suppression space. Anyone else from group one want to add anything? That's what I got.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah, and everyone in group one. How about group two?
I think that
I believe
was
that
my.
was that your group? Was that group 4? Okay.
In group 3, but then when you dropped yourself, Katie, the groups got all scrambled. So go
Yeah, I
ahead.
know my note-taking documents are all askew now. Something has to go wrong, you know? But Brett, I think you should go.
All right, we'll get through it. I'm sort of drawing on some of the things to answer the questions because we didn't answer the questions explicitly. We just had really a conversation learning about the guide. One thing was question of how do you tier to different levels of planning and collaboration. So we talked about a county level is sort of the target, but a lot of action happens lower than that at smaller scales, and a lot of things bigger. And so how do you align those? And one thing that came out is really leaning on partners to gain trust at different levels and with different sort of entities that are operating in those spaces, that no one entity really has the maximum trust or authority or respect at those different levels. So resources that I wrote down is you need a variety of partners to work together. You need federal government, state government, NGOs, community-based partners, science-based partners, so that you can pull on the card that's most appropriate at the different ways. So that's sort of resources that would be needed. And like they just said, staffing and robust resource organizations at those levels that are interested in engaging authentically in these collaborative groups. And then another one was understanding community values better. So we talked a lot about stage 1 and how to think about interests versus positions and reframing that and those kind of resources. And so having communications personnel and facilitators and those kind of things were something that some people in our group had, like, yeah, I got a communications person, but having them understand this framework would be helpful because they're not always thinking in this way either. Yeah.
Thank you, Brett, and everyone in group 2. Group 3, or I can just start calling on the names of the note takers if that's easier.
Don't know what group I'm in, so my name would be better when you're ready for me to.
Well, why don't you go ahead since you're unmuted?
Okay. Hi. I had a really good conversation about really like the resources needed around and navigation needed around interfacing with the public. And so how we talked a bit about how this guide is at that county scale ideally, and the partners and collaborators it refers to might be like an organization or a municipality or a regional organization kind of at different scales, but there's always that public aspect piece And it'd be difficult when people are to have conversations with the public where they are misunderstanding or they might be misinformed. So I we that was kind of like a resource needed to navigate this, is maybe some of those like soft skills, those facilitation skills. I like that Brett mentioned interest in positions, because I think that can help. That's a tool if you look up interest-based problem solving to help you navigate those pieces. And then we also had an observation about to navigate the stages of readiness. A needed resource is monitoring capacity and funding. So for adaptive management, monitoring piece is really key, and that piece is often the last priority, because there's a lot of other things for these folks and practitioners on the ground. So that felt like a really cool observation to bring to resource allocators of, that's a need. If we want to do this and do adaptive management, monitoring is a big piece of that. And so I'll stop taking any more time, but I would just say, to that point, I appreciated how this was a forum to connect allocators and practitioners, resource allocators and practitioners, and gather kind of some of those insights from practitioners that we can hopefully bring up.
Cool, thank you to group. Laura.
Yes,
Tyler,
Christy.
Tyler, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So we had a really robust discussion. I'll focus on some of the resources that we talked about folks needed, and then kind of the last question around how they can use the guide to help practitioners and resource allocators collaborate and leverage resources. But in terms of needs, one thing that we heard that hasn't been mentioned was a really good discussion around just acknowledging that when this guide was first being developed, the funding situation and certainty was a lot different than it is now, and really thinking about maybe some additional resources around getting creative with, or thinking about other ways to diversify funding to help communities better understand how to acquire different types of funding. Another thing that we talked about was, and Brett mentioned this, because you might have been a little bit light on resources available in the planning guide, partly because they are pretty much maybe obsolete by the time they're on the planning guide. There may be a need for an online resource addendum that is a living database that has information about the entities on this call and the entities that engage with collaboratives across Colorado, to identify what their resources are and what they have to bring to the table, and kind of walk that to different stages of the collaborative readiness framework. And then in terms of how can we use this guide, Allison Lurch made a really good point at the end that there's such a diversity and deep network of collaboratives in Colorado, and some of them are very well established, but oftentimes we kind of have a way of doing things and we feel like that's the way that things need to be done. And they felt that this guide provides kind of a desk resource. It's not something that you should just read through from top to bottom, but if you're stuck and you don't want to be reactive anymore or keep doing the same thing, that this guide can be a place to go back to as a group and reevaluate and see if there's additional opportunities to help keep moving them along through those stages. And then finally, I think you all mentioned it really well in the beginning, but the idea of being very clear that collaboration and the stages of readiness is nonlinear, and actually it may behoove you to be nonlinear if you're spending a ton of time at the beginning on identifying the collaborative structures and the arrangements, developing vision statements. That inertia can cause people to kind of step out of the process because they're not getting things done. So it might actually be beneficial to move on to some of those pilot projects and implementation, and then move back to some of the earlier stages.
Very interesting. That's awesome. Chaska.
Well, great conversations were happening in all these different breakout rooms. I think so. We had some folks from the Coal Creek Canyon Collaborative, which is like stage one, from Boulder County Open Space, which Boulder County is packed full of collaboratives. I would say if you could characterize the county as at a stage, like it's pretty well advanced, but there's different stages within the county. And then we had a gentleman from the State Forest Service. So people explored a range of actions, 1 to 2, 8 developing objectives and looking at community outreach, clicked around on some of the tools. I think generally the consensus was like, we want more time to play around with this to be able to answer these breakout discussion questions. But some of the themes that we haven't already talked about already were, I think maybe some of the subtext, particularly looking at that Boulder County group, like I said, there's a lot of collaboration happening in Boulder County, and something that maybe isn't as directly addressed in the guide is like navigating dense collaboration. So maybe that's something that the CFCN could explore in the future, as well as just like really expanding on, where and how to build capacity, build out skilled staff, particularly for the State Forest Service, and just kind of help improve expertise on the ground to collaborate. So I will leave it there since we were really short on time. But thanks to the folks in my group for taking a look at it with me.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm sorry that we don't have more time for full group discussion. I'm not sure when we got off, but it sounds like your breakouts were really productive, and I'm super excited to read more in depth about those. I'll try and write up a summary, especially of like what resources are needed and what resources people have to share, and maybe we can start on something like that addendum that Tyler's talking about. We can send out some current resources that are relevant. Yeah, if you have any other questions about the guide, please let somebody from that team know. You can reach out to me because I chair the Leveraging Resources Committee, or I'm sure any of us would be happy to answer questions or point you to whatever you're looking for. Like I mentioned earlier, and Laura mentioned earlier, we've got a 4-page overview coming out very soon that'll be hopefully really easily shareable, so you can spread the word. Anyone else, anything that I'm missing that we should allude to before we all jump off?
Someone in my group mentioned it's an intimidating document, and I just want to say you all opened it today, and we have a summary document coming, and we know that on our team. So we're really working to communicate it well and make it more approachable. So thanks for being here and approaching it with us.
And I would also say the idea of websites, Tyler's talking about website for new resources and tools and things. The author team is resources. Like that is, rather than trying to keep a website up to date of what's the latest thing or how do I access the guide, the resources are, hey, I need to do this. I'm going to give Katie a call, or I'm going to give Brett or Chaska a call, or other people, and say, what is the latest tool? What is the latest process? What page can I find this on? Please, that is resources that we are happy to allocate and share.
I agree with both of those. Thank you so much for adding those on. And it's 3 o'clock, so thanks everyone. It was great to see you, and we'll see you around. Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.